Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Atheist Experience. We are live July 4th, and I'm your host, Ashley Perrien. My co-host this week, Russell Glasser.
Hello.
Welcome back. We are being sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We have weekly meetings every Sunday at Crescent City Beignets on 6th Street, a couple blocks west of Lamar. That starts at around 11:30 or so and goes basically until we decide to leave. We did have a meeting today, despite it being July 4th and a holiday. That's every Sunday, save the third Sunday of every month when we have our lecture series at the Austin History Center on 9th and Guadalupe. The next one of those, I believe, is going to be, the 24th, I believe. We have a speaker coming in from the ACLU. Don't know exactly what the topic is on that yet, but I assume something about church-state separation. That, again, I believe it's the third Sunday, which I'm pretty sure is July 24th. So keep an eye out for that, and that starts at 12:30. Other activity that we have, every Thursday, we have Atheist Happy Hour at Antonio's Tex-Mex on the southbound feeder of I-35 just south of 183. That starts every Thursday night at 7:30 and basically goes until, again, we decide to leave, usually around 10 or so. Good time just to hang out, talk with other atheists, and drink a couple of beers. All of our meetings are open to anyone who wants to come to them. You don't have to be a member of the group or anything, but they are for atheist and atheist-friendly people only. So, Christians who are watching, if you want to come down and meet some of us, no problem. Just don't preach to us. We will kick you out. But like I say, anybody else who wants to come, please do. We'd love to meet you. And I believe that is it. One quick non-ongoing announcement that we have is every year the State Board of Education has hearings on a new set of textbooks that are being approved for the state of Texas and subsequently the rest of the country. This year, I believe they're going over health and I believe it's science, or is it possibly just health? But I know health is part of it, and that includes sex education and things like that. The fundamentalists are on the road again, and they're trying to get it to be abstinence only. There's very little, if any, talk about condom use or anything like that in there. Basically, as far as they're concerned, the sex ed chapter is just don't have it. Next chapter. They have hearings on this on July 14th. The first of several hearings is on July 14th, where if you've actually reviewed a book or you just have input into what the book should or should not have, then you can schedule to be at the hearing, give your piece, and have it be heard by the people who are actually making these choices. The hearing is actually on July 14th. If you want to sign up for that, you have to sign up by July 9th. And you can actually sign up via email. The address, which is on your screen now, I believe, SBOE support at SBOE support at tea.state.tx.us. And
if what they did last time around is any indication, I should give an early warning to people who are thinking about talking to the textbook group,
okay,
which is that they like you to at least act like you've read the books. Well, I mean, you'd think that's obvious, but it kind of puts some people in a bit of a bind, because what the fundamentalists like to do is they like to go through books and come up with nitpicks which are based on their religious beliefs, and, what a lot of us are objecting to is them sticking their religious beliefs in the books, but since those aren't written in the books yet, they're not that relevant to what's in the books now.
Yeah.
So what a lot of the fundamentalist members of the state board liked to do, like Terry Leo, is say, do you have anything specific to say about this book?
Yeah.
And it's, no, I object to the objections, basically.
Okay.
But, if you want to make your case that much stronger, pick out a particular book and talk about it.
Yeah. And I believe if you go to the TFN, the Texas Freedom Network, I believe they have copies of the books there. You'd have to check with them. I don't know directly. But you may be able to get a copy of the book from them and then go over the health or sex education chapter. just that one bit, which is probably just going to be 10, 15 chapters, something like 10, 15 pages. Check it out, see what it says, and
you
kind
might
of go
learn
from
something
that.
too.
Exactly. So, but again, that hearing is on July 14th. Sign up by July 9th if you're interested. And again, the email address, I believe, is on the screen, or is that?
No.
Okay. Well, there's some website on the screen. Check it out.
tfn.org.
Okay, check them out. I'm sure they'll have information there.
Yeah.
Also, I believe our website, atheist-community.org, also has information there about the hearing. So you can check it out there too. Yes, our other ongoing thing, is the Nonprofits Internet Audio Show, produced or hosted at atheistnetwork.com. That's every other Saturday, 2 to 3:30. Yes, it's an excellent show. Hosted by Jeff D., co-hosted by Dennis Lubay, and produced by Russell Glasser.
Hi, folks.
At Glasser Studios.
If you listened in yesterday and noticed that there wasn't a feed for the first 15 minutes, it's because I got my brand spanking new machine and I was trying to get it working. But we did pull it off, so if you stuck it out, you should always go to the chat room if you don't hear it broadcasting right away, because they'll all be complaining about it and you'll figure out what's going on.
Do you have the full hour and a half on the website when it's posted?
I uploaded it, but you can't see it to download yet. But
okay.
I'll.
Okay, but it will be the first hour and a half. It won't be.
It will be the entire hour and a half.
Okay, cool. All right. Yep. And if you go to our website again, click on the Nonprofits Radio link. You'll be able to download the last handful of episodes from there. Excellent show. So. Anyway, this is the Atheist Experience. We are live today, July 4th. Yay! We are a live call-in show, and we'll be getting the calls in a little while, so just, sit by your phones, wait for the phone number to come up in a little while. First, we're going to go to Russell Glasser and see what you have for us.
Okay. I have to say right away, so you'll all be sympathetic to me, that I haven't done that much preparation on this. I've written a bunch of notes, and I talked to myself for about 15 minutes in the hall. So if I kind of ramble, then bear with me.
We'll forgive you.
Last time I was on the show, I talked about creationism, which is sort of a morbid fascination of mine. I kind of talked about the history of creationism. And one of the things that creationists say a lot is that when you accept evolution as the reigning scientific theory, or as they would like to say, if you believe in evolution, then you have an evolutionary worldview, and that spawns all sorts of terrible things. Just before I came here, I pulled a quote off of a typical creationist website, in which they said, "What are the fruits of an evolutionary worldview? Cheapening of human life, unwarranted elevation of animal life, and why shouldn't men act like animals?"
I like that, unwarranted elevation of animal life.
Yeah.
As in, they really don't deserve any kind of special treatment.
Right, but I mean, their point is that evolution makes you anti-religious, and it also makes you have absolutely no conscience, so you're free to go around slaughtering each other indiscriminately, because that's the way it works in nature, according to them. And we heard a lot of that, actually, in the last textbook hearings, when people would stand up and say that the reason we have so many school shootings nowadays is because kids are taught evolution.
I'd love to know what kind of studies they have to show that relationship there.
If you heard these people, you'd realize they don't put too much stock in them studies.
True. That's all book learning anyway.
Yes. So you might think that I'm going to blow off the concept of this whole evolutionary worldview as a bunch of malarkey, but in fact, I think there's something in it. I think that there is such a thing as an evolutionary worldview, and the reason I think that is because I think I have one. And furthermore, I'm going to go so far as to say that there is something about the evolutionary worldview that inherently challenges religious beliefs. But it's not for the reasons that they think. So before I get into that, I'd like to go through the 1-minute nutshell crash course on evolution, which is basically the theory of evolution goes like this. At any given time, a lot more organisms are born than can possibly live productively. I mean, in order to be productive, basically they have to live long enough to bear children and then pass their traits on to the next generation. They don't all do that because there's limited resources in the world, so a lot of plants and animals die young. The difference between, say, an animal that dies early and an animal that doesn't often boils down to very small variations in the way they're put together. I mean, they're not like huge jumps like you always hear creationists saying, well, why doesn't a cat turn into a dog? They're things like, one of them might have slightly longer legs, might run slightly faster, might be just a little bit smarter, and that happens to make all the difference when push comes to shove. So you get a whole lot of these little teeny changes accumulating over time, and as the competition winnows out the ones that just don't live very long, in the long term, you get the world populated with a whole bunch of species that do something really, really well, which is survive and have babies. And that's just the way it seems to work. So you have competition, you have selection for traits that make you effective at surviving, and you have survival. When I say that I have an evolutionary worldview, I mean that when you learn about this very simple but extremely powerful idea, you start to tend to kind of apply it to a lot of other things. I mean, we have this paradigm of competition in a whole lot of things in our society. We see competition everywhere. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we as a nation are more interested than most in sports, for instance, which is basically watching people compete with each other, and one of them wins and one of them loses. We have a great big old competition which happens once every 4 years and happens to be happening this year, and that would be elections. And more than that, our entire system of the way we do things is based on competition. We have democracy, which is electing people, and we have capitalism, which is competing for a limited amount of money and trying to, win in the game of producing the product that makes the most money. So I think that however much the fundamentalists might complain about it, we do have a society which basically has a lot of respect for competition at its heart. Now, I personally enjoy competition a lot. In fact, one of my hobbies, one of my biggest hobbies, is online computer games. In particular, I happen to really like online strategy games such as Warcraft, and I approach some of these games with the same kind of fascination with which many people approach football. I like to read about strategies, I like to be vaguely aware of who's doing well at them, and I like to know why they are. Now, I'd be the first to say that I'm basically a mediocre player myself. I get thrashed when I go online. But I still think the games are interesting. And one article that I came across when I was reading about theory of gaming, I'm going to have them put up a website. It's an article at Serlin.net, which is written by a guy named David Serlin, who's a game designer. And this article is called "Playing to Win." Now, Serlin makes an interesting observation, which is basically that you can tell the difference between a fair player and a really good player. He refers to players who are not too good at games as scrubs. I don't know what the root of that word is, but I'll happily admit here that I probably am one. But you can tell the difference between an excellent player and a not so good player by the way they handle losing. Yeah. Got that? I mean, you can tell whether somebody is going to win in the long term by how he handles losing. Now, what a scrub will do, according to Serlin, when he loses, he'll complain that it's not fair. The opponent did something that was cheating. He did something that was cheap. He did something that I wouldn't have done.
Yeah.
And so he lost. By contrast, an excellent player who loses a game will tend to say, I lost that game. The opponent must have done something that I didn't think of. I wonder what it was. And then he'll go in and he'll think about how the game went. He'll watch the replay of the game if it's available. And he'll try to analyze exactly what his opponent did that was so darn effective. He doesn't assume that well, I'm a brilliant player, so the opponent must have done something completely unfair. He says, well, that guy was better than me in one particular case. And if he finds that the opponent tried a genuinely new and unique strategy that he hadn't thought of, he'll steal it.
Yeah.
He'll use the strategy on someone else if it's good. Now, what that does is it allows him to try out a variety of new strategies. In other words, a whole bunch of variation, and he selects the ones that win. And one interesting thing that happens when you do that is, first of all, if the strategy is a good one, then you'll win with it a lot, and hence you'll increase your winning record. And if it's not so good, then somebody else will beat you. But then you'll learn yet another new strategy that you can use against somebody else in the future, and you'll learn how to defeat the strategy that beat you in the first place. So what good players do that scrubs don't is continue to learn and evolve their strategies through constant playing and taking their losses like a man, so to speak. No offense to the women out there, but
Figure of speech.
you know what I mean. There are all kinds of things we compete at, of course. I mean, there's sports, there's chess. One reason I never got any good at chess was because I noticed that I just got bored at reading all these analyses of famous chess games. But I guess that's how really good chess players learn, is after a certain point, they just have to pay attention to how games have been played in the past and think about the strategies that were used in that particular case. Now, today is, of course, July 4th. It's American Independence Day. We're all feeling very patriotic, I'm sure. So I'd like to bring up a historical example of some scrubs. The redcoats.
Ah, yes. One of those past methods that has kind of fallen out of popularity.
Yeah, well, I mean, now you'll notice from a purely objective standpoint that they lost. But, the question might come up, why did they lose? And I think one great reason, and by the way, Serlin mentions this briefly in a humorous sidebar on his webpage, but one reason that they lost is because they were trying to adhere to some sort of rules of conduct in war, these rules of engagement, which were basically artificial. They were fake constructs that they made that limited the way they play. You have to play a certain way. You can't put in new strategies because that would be cheap, to put it as online gamers might say. For instance, one of the things that they did was wear bright colored uniforms that were all color coordinated, which made them really easy targets. Another thing they did was they would line up in these neat little rows and march in lockstep toward the enemy, and they would get shot at. But the big mistake that they made was that they assumed that the Americans also respected the same rules of engagement that they did, and they assumed that they would be fighting on equal terms. Whereas the Americans' idea for how to run a war was, let's do something that will beat the other guys. I mean, they have a lot more soldiers than we do, so how about we not wear bright colors?
Yeah.
How about we not march right at them, but we sneak around the side and do some kind of guerrilla tactics? One of the things that the rebels did that was particularly cute, I think, was they would raise a white flag pretending that their whole regiment was going to surrender, and then the British would march at them, and the Americans would drop the flags, raise the guns, and slaughter
Mow
them.
them down, yeah.
Yes. Now, that may get a smile out of you guys in the audience. You think, those plucky Americans. of course, it's a little sobering to think that we don't find that so funny when the Iraqis do that sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's also fair to mention that we still do a lot of this today. I mean, there are still rules of engagement in war.
That's true.
That we have today. It's not quite as blatant as something like that, but you can't, just
right.
torture
Of
your
course, you
person
have to
war.
realize that there are other things to be concerned about besides just winning the battle. For instance, there's maintaining diplomatic relations. You want other people to like you.
Yeah.
So, the strategy of winning is complicated because it really depends on what game you're trying to win. But there's still a good lesson in all this, which is that you should think about what your preconceptions are and not assume that the rules that you have in your mind for how the game works are going to be the way that everyone plays. I mean, if you were playing a game of rock, paper, scissors, and then the opponent's strategy was to play scissors every time, and your strategy was to play paper every time, you could be like, well, that's not fair. I always play paper, and he's playing scissors on me. He keeps winning. He should do the gentlemanly thing and throw the match sometimes. Whereas what you should be doing is starting to play rock. Every time. Because if he's going to do something that predictable, then the least you can do is take advantage of it. So that's games. But I'd like to get into another arena where competition is highly valued, and that is science. Now, evolution, of course, is a science, but I think in a broader sense, the whole idea of how science works is based on an evolutionary paradigm, and it's basically evolution of ideas. Everybody comes up with their own ideas, and they throw them out in the general arena of squabbling scientists. And the scientists basically look at these views and do their best to pick them apart whatever way they can. And in the long term, all the really bad ideas get weeded out by the scientists, selected, if you will. And all the really good ideas don't get weeded out, which leaves us with a really solid body of knowledge that determines what we think we know these days. There's this sort of scientific gauntlet, you might say, where an idea has to go through this sort of heavy beating by lots of different scientists. And if it makes it through undamaged, then it probably is a really good idea. And that's another example of how competition can be good. Now, when creationists, or for instance crackpots who believe in ESP or perpetual motion machines, come in and they say, hey, I've got this really great idea that will knock all you scientists off your feet, and when you realize how brilliant I am, a lot of times what happens is that some scientists will look at it, they'll immediately, out of force of habit, say, well, that's stupid. I mean, you can't reproduce it. It violates the second law of thermodynamics. There's no reason why it should work, and you haven't proved that it does work. So where's your evidence? And when that happens, the creationists or crackpots will go running to their respective presses, and they'll say, it's not fair.
Yeah.
These guys are scrubs.
The exclusionary and ivory tower scientists who don't allow anybody else in.
Exactly.
So to their
I presented this great idea to these people that would revolutionize science, and all they wanted to do was pick holes in it.
Kind of the point.
They don't get it. That's how science works. That's how scientists deal with other scientists. The reason that perpetual motion machine crackpots aren't taken seriously is because they have no idea about science. They haven't ever had to deal with criticism. They might have put up a website where lots of people or talked to their other crackpot friends who said, yeah, this is a great idea. Yeah. But they've never really exposed themselves to genuine criticism from people who don't have a vested interest in their success. And rather than complaining that this is unfair, this is cheap, they're being mean to me, what they should learn to do is take their losses, figure out why they lost, and use that as a way of understanding how to do good science in the future.
It's actually kind of odd. That just reminds me. On our email list, we have the Ask an Atheist email list. It's one of the Yahoo groups.
Yeah, online debate is a great way to get practice at competition.
Yeah. There was this one guy that showed up on the Ask an Atheist list just this week, and he started by posting this long diatribe and just how, his life was hell and then he found the Lord and now everything's great again. And then somebody said, look, this is called Ask an Atheist. If you have a question, go ahead and ask it. Otherwise, leave. This is not, preach to the atheists. And so the guy follows up, as anybody respectable would, by posting yet another long diatribe and missive on something
which
different.
Ignored the original criticism.
Exactly. And so then other people chimed in and said, look, we don't need preaching. If you have a question, ask it. And so he kind of stomped off and said, well, y'all are just so closed to other ideas, and if y'all don't want to listen, then fine. It's like, dude, this is how the list works.
Yeah. It's not that people don't want to hear your ideas. It's just that they'd like to have a chance to answer them.
Yeah.
And a lot of online debaters make this mistake. I mean, not just in our list, but on news groups, new people who come on and they say, aha, I will knock the atheists over with sheer force of my brilliance. And they've read some kind of apologetics book.
Something in Reader's Digest.
Yeah, or they've heard an argument on a radio show where they said, this is a brilliant argument and it knocks the atheists down every single time. And then they go and they carry that argument onto the online world and they realize it really doesn't work that well. And instead of learning from their losses, they go, oh, that's not fair. I'm going to post something else, and this will blow you away. And eventually they go, oh, that's not fair. People online are all mean, and then they go away, and we all do a victory dance.
First one is just a warning shot.
Yeah. I've seen this happen over and over again. When I debate online, there have been some real doozies where somebody just cleaned my clock. And what I've done with that in the past is not use that argument anymore.
Yeah.
That's how you learn.
Yeah.
You either stop using bad arguments, or else, if you think your argument's still good, go hunt down examples, because there's tons of examples on the net of other people who are taking the same argument, and learn from what they do.
Yeah. Actually, that's what happened to me the first time. Soon after I found the ACA, I signed up on the email list, and they were having some big discussion about something. This was like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, I want to say it was something like public health or something like that. And so I post, when I was in college, very few people I know who were actually into debate and discussion or anything like that. And so I love debating. And when I was in college, nobody else loved to. And so whenever I got into a debate, 10 minutes into it, they would get annoyed and bored and say, yeah, okay, I guess you're right, fine, whatever.
That's no fun.
Yeah, but that's kind of what I got used to.
Right.
And so I come onto the ACA list. I figure I'm this great world-class debater. I post this 2-paragraph missive on, here's, y'all are all just completely smoking crack, and here's the right thing. And then every single email after that pretty much trashed everything I said point by point by point.
Right.
And so I was kind of beaten into submission saying, okay.
But you learned from it, right?
Yeah, I kind of went back into lurk mode for about the next year. But then I started posting again once I read more and just, saw how arguments went and stuff like that. I learned from it, from, the method and the arguments. Went back on and, now it's not a big problem. But yeah, the first time they beat me with a big stick.
Well, that's the thing about competition. You can't really learn unless you practice.
Yeah.
Or unless you at least observe what other people are doing. And that's why, a lot of people would speculate, with pretty good reason, that if you could somehow go back in time and take, the single-celled organism that was crawling out of the sludge, and you brought it to the present time, they'd immediately get eaten.
Yeah.
because they have no defenses. They haven't really had a chance to compete.
Yeah.
And so you have to compete to evolve. And that brings me to what I think of more as the philosophy of the evolutionary worldview, which is that you should treat your beliefs as an evolutionary process, because people are fallible. People are often wrong about things. And when you find out that you're wrong, the proper thing to do is either go and look for more reasons why you're not actually wrong, or just accept that you're wrong and deal with it. That's happened to me plenty. Oh, shoot. See, now, my phone doesn't ring enough on the air, so
yes,
so
this is
I haven't had enough
of the radio
practice with
show.
turning it off. Sorry about that. Where was I?
I don't know.
So anyway, I think, okay, so let me bring this back to what this has to do with religion and atheism. I think that if you have what the creationists would call an evolutionary worldview, you won't hold certain ideas sacred. You might realize that you'll certainly realize that some ideas are better than others, and you should set it as your goal to weed out which of your ideas are good and which of your ideas are bad, and try to come up with ideas that most closely match reality. I think that religion actively discourages that. I think by the very nature of religion, what they do is put forth some text or some group of leaders, and they'll say, this is absolute truth. It may not be questioned. It's definitely right. And when you get in the habit of assuming that what you believe is definitely right, and only hanging out with other people who believe that it's definitely right, you get intellectually lazy.
Yeah.
I don't think I could possibly put it as well as a great famous atheist who also had this thought. So I'm going to read a quote from Douglas Adams, who died last year.
That was last year or the year before?
Was it last year?
It was like 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Wow, time flies.
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is up on the screen. You can see the issue of the American Atheist newsletter in which Douglas Adams was interviewed. And they asked him, well, Douglas, how did you become an atheist? By the way, for those of you who don't know, Douglas Adams is the author of many very funny books, particularly the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. So here's what Douglas Adams said. In the years I'd spent learning history, physics, Latin, math, I'd learned the hard way something about the standards of argument, standards of proof, standards of logic, etc. In fact, we had just been learning how to spot the different types of logical fallacy, and it suddenly became apparent to me that these standards simply didn't seem to apply in religious matters. In religious education, we were asked to listen respectfully to arguments which, if they had been put forward in support of a view of, say, why the Corn Laws came to be abolished, when they were, would have been laughed at as silly and childish, and in terms of logic and proof, just plain wrong. Why was this? Well, in history, even though the understanding of events of cause and effect is a matter of interpretation, and even though interpretation is in many ways a matter of opinion, nevertheless, those opinions and interpretations are honed to within an inch of their lives in the withering crossfire of argument and counter-argument. And those that are still standing are then subjected to a whole new round of challenges of fact and logic from the next generation of historians, and so on. All opinions are not equal. Some are a very great deal more robust, sophisticated, and well supported in logic and argument than others. So I was already familiar with, and I'm afraid accepting of, the view that you couldn't apply the logic of physics to religion, that they were dealing with different types of truth. I now think this is baloney, but to continue. What astonished me, however, was the realization that the arguments in favor of religious ideas were so feeble and silly next to the robust arguments of something as interpretative and opinionated as history. In fact, they were embarrassingly childish. They were never subject to the kind of outright challenge, which was the normal stock in trade of any other area of intellectual endeavor whatsoever. Why not? Because they wouldn't stand up to it. That's my opinion. Put up that phone number now.
Sticking to it.
So let me just sum up. My philosophy is an evolutionary worldview, and my philosophy says hold nothing sacred. Question everything, even your most cherished beliefs. You know, people often ask me why I refuse to express the strong atheist position, which is basically I'm positive that no God possibly exists. I'm not positive that no God could possibly exist. And the reason why I don't take a strong atheist position is pretty simple. It's not because I think there will turn out to be a God. It's just because I think the only way to be intellectually honest is to assume that your beliefs, any of your beliefs, might be wrong. And I would say that the more open you are to evaluate new ideas critically, the less likely it is that you actually will be wrong. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, having a worldview like that, it applies to just about everything. I mean, you're always reevaluating your ideas and your beliefs and your views on life. Because, again, contradictory evidence can come up that makes you say that, well, the idea I had before, probably not such a good idea anymore. And then other ones that have worked in the past will continue to work and continue to beat out other ideas, and so you continue with those. Social Darwinism, I think, is something that has kind of fallen out of favor.
It's not a good idea.
To a certain, yes.
Social Darwinism, of course, was the extreme of Darwinist economics, where they said, well, you know, they're poor. They obviously deserve to be poor, or they wouldn't be poor.
Yeah.
Because they can't compete. So let's let them die.
Yeah. But cultures and societies.
A certain amount of moderation is called for in that kind of case.
Yeah, but even societies are the kind of things where if it's a bad society and it doesn't work in some way or another, then it's probably not going to last or prosper as well as another society that does.
Right.
The American ideas are something that go across the world. Mm-hmm. You know, the BMX craze and the skateboard craze and everything, you know, a lot of that starts in the United States and then kind of spreads east.
You know, it's part of the reason that I worry about our current political climate, and I don't want to get political here, but I will say that some political leaders, who I will not name, think that they have the right to be insulated from criticism.
Yeah.
Think that they should have a bubble around them where the only people allowed inside that bubble are people who agree with them and will tell them nice things.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way to get your butt kicked in the world arena, where people don't just get coddled that way.
Yeah. Especially in something as important as a worldview.
Yes.
Now, if they were simply, you know, in an online game and they wanted to be in that, that's not such a big deal.
No.
But when you're running a country...
Well, the great thing about playing games is that you can afford to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
When you lose a game, you feel bad, but you don't die.
No real harm is done.
Yeah. You don't die. Your life isn't ruined. You just join on the... you just log in and start another game.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we'll go on to a couple calls now. Again, we are the Atheist Experience. We are live today, July 4th. Phone number is on your screen. Go ahead and use it if you got any questions or comments for us. First off, we have Todd. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Hi, Todd.
Pretty good. What you got for us?
Well, I was going to question, I wanted to know what percentage of people in your network have strong beliefs that we have our evolutionary scale, that we have, you know, in our physical universe that we experience, and that being all we have.
Meaning what we see is, as in there's no spiritual side to it? Is that what you mean?
If there's no other process involved, because I'm completely on your boat when you talk about evolution. It's so obvious. It's so there.
Okay.
But I believe that there are things that we can't see in our three-dimensional reality that we presuppose is not there because of our egos.
Okay.
I don't think it has anything to do with presupposing, personally. I think it has to do with only going with the ideas that have good backing.
Exactly.
I think it's important to pay attention and listen to the arguments that people present for that sort of thing. But just because you have an evolutionary worldview, as I put it, doesn't mean that you have to accept all ideas as being equal.
Oh yeah. That's certainly true. Okay, basically, I believe there are certain things that humans can do to look at potential truths that are out there. I mean, the simple fact that a giraffe gets up right after it's born and runs off, starts running off. That's things like that are very interesting to me, and just all the intuition that we and every animal has is very interesting to me. I just look at that as like an inspiration to some of my belief systems, which don't they don't climb anywhere towards like Christianity or anything like that. But
I think there's definitely a lot to the universe and the world and human psychology and what we are able to do than what we are currently seeing.
Yeah.
I think there are other things that we could be doing. Now, I want to be careful in that, just to say that I don't think any of it is supernatural.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who have studied certain forms of meditation and martial arts and such who can relax to such a state where their heart beats around about once a minute.
Mm-hmm.
That's not supernatural in any way.
Well,
it's basically just learning to control your body.
Humans are capable of. I don't believe in it being supernatural, and many of these things, if we actually talked about them right now, I'm sure you would very easily laugh at me.
Well, I mean, it's fine to believe those things.
Find out for yourself. I believe that it would change anyone's mind, whether that be George W. Bush or any atheist out there. And it's not.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's fine to believe those things, but if you want to convince other people that they're true, then the thing to do is start looking for persuasive ways to demonstrate that they're true.
Precisely.
And if you come at people and say, well, I have some things to say about this, but you'd laugh at me if I told you, then I think a good idea would be to look for some reasons that wouldn't be laughed at.
Well, I'm saying that you have to have wholeheartedly, an attempt to listen to what someone's saying, and not even because I'll listen to anybody. I won't necessarily believe it until I experience it myself. But
Yeah.
But I just don't want my ego getting in the way of my advancement. That's even a possibility.
Yeah, and that's partly why we have this show, and we have, I mentioned earlier, an Ask an Atheist email list and stuff like that, is because we do hear a lot of different arguments a lot of different times. Mm-hmm. And listening to things, it's always a good idea to have at least an open ear.
Of course.
And listen to something. Now, a lot of arguments can be dismissed very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. Simply because we've heard them 150 times. And
Pascal's wager.
Exactly. The one that was exactly on my mind. And we've discussed
every single time
times.
Somebody comes in and says, if there is a God, then you've lost everything, and they think that's original because they haven't practiced that argument.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's ridiculous. I don't believe that anyone's lost anything, and I don't believe anyone is even capable of losing anything, personally. So
Okay.
I believe there's only a forward movement.
Yeah. Yeah. So. All right. Did you have anything else for us?
I believe that's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for calling.
All right.
Bye. Yeah, Pascal's wager is definitely a big one. And I've heard, I once had a long talk with Paul Wilson, who's been on our show once in a blue moon. He'll come on. And he's got some points of view on things that are very, very enlightening at times. And so the whole idea of alternative medicine and something like that was something that for a long time I thought a lot of it is junk.
Yeah.
It's not going to do anything. But, we should be more open to it because there could be a lot there.
Yeah.
And basically, I sat down with him one day and we were talking about it and just going over these different arguments and looking at it from different points of view, basically, and realized that, yeah, most of it is bunk, and it's, a really good reason that it's bunk, too. And so a lot of those things, they can be, I won't say dismissed out of hand, but they really have to put forth a lot of evidence.
Right. Well, alternative medicine is a perfect example of ideas that don't have to compete with anything, because in order to become a mainstream medicine, you have to go through a whole battery of tests and approvals by the FDA, and you have to demonstrate that your product actually does what it says it does. Whereas if you just want to put something in a bottle and sell it at some, nature store, you pretty much don't have to do anything. You can say whatever you want to. All you can't say is this hasn't been approved.
Yeah.
But then you can go ahead and say, oh, it's not approved because the FDA is bigoted against me.
Yeah.
They're cheap. They don't play fair.
Yeah. So, that's, alternative medicine is a scary one because they're not out there competing their ideas. Mm-hmm. It is a close-knit society, essentially, where everyone kind of agrees with everyone else to a certain extent, and you get these ideas that drinking your own urine is going to cure you of cancer. Again, that hasn't gone through FDA approval, and it unlikely will. Likely won't work, so don't try it. But yeah, these ideas out there grow because they haven't practiced having to debate them and argue them, and they haven't really seen them defeated before.
Right. And plus, not to mention that drinking your own urine is just completely stupid. Even most people who haven't been trained in science can realize that. It's like urine, gross.
Exactly. We had somebody come into one of our meetings a while back who was talking about that kind of thing.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was several years ago. But yeah, show up to these meetings and start saying all the health benefits that he had found, and we're just, okay, dude, whatever.
Yeah.
Some things we just don't need to hear about. Too much information.
So what else have we got today?
All right, I have got one or two quick stories that I could go over. Again, July 4th, happy Patriotic Day, everybody. Again, we are a live call-in show. Please go ahead and give us a call if you got any questions, comments, concerns, any kind of questions for atheists or evolutionary ideas or anything like that. We'd love to hear from you. This is a story I actually got, which was posted today. The White House tries to rein in scientists.
Great example.
This is a pretty scary one. The Bush administration has ordered that government scientists must be approved by a senior political appointee before they can participate in meetings convened by the World Health Organization, the leading international health and science agency. A top official from the Health and Human Services Department in April asked the WHO to begin routing requests for participation in its meetings to the department's secretary for review, rather than directly invite individual scientists, as has long been the case. So essentially, what the government is saying is that you need written approval to go to these meetings with other scientists and health people who actually know what they're talking about. And so you have to go to Daddy to get approval for this, rather than just going. And again, when you're dealing with something as important and large as the World Health Organization, and medicine, science, health, those are important things. To all of a sudden have to have the governmental stamp of approval on this is a very scary idea.
Yeah, it bugs me when when scientists, when government people act like they know how to regulate science. Okay, nobody knows everything. I think we can all agree on that.
I'll go with that one.
There are a lot of things that I don't know about, and if you happen to be an elected government official, then I assume that you know a hell of a lot more about how to get elected and maybe more about how to run a country than I do. On the other hand, just because you know that doesn't mean that you know anything about how science works. And I think it's the height of arrogance when, I think if the government wants to regulate science, the proper thing to do would be to bring in a panel of expert, unbiased scientists, bring them in and say, okay, what's your idea? I mean, can you sum up the scientific arguments for this for me and tell me why we should go a certain way, one way or the other?
Yeah.
Like stem cell research, for instance.
Yeah.
You don't find a whole lot of mainstream scientists who know anything about the subject who think that stem cell research is evil, and yet you've got a lot of politicians who don't want to listen to scientists going around spouting off about how they know what's best. I mean, you even had Bush saying, well, you don't need stem cells. There are lots of other ways to research the same things.
Yeah.
It's like, hey...
Yeah,
how about getting some scientists to weigh in on that rather than just giving your opinion?
Yeah. Just like this, in a way, the school board hearings, I mean, I can understand why they do them. This is what I was talking about earlier, the school board hearings, and there are hearings.
Legislators are not expert educators.
Exactly. If you want to find out what should go into a science textbook, let's ask scientists.
And teachers.
If you want to go into a health textbook, let's ask people who are actually in the health field, rather than just someone who's off the street and say, what do you think they should be teaching our kids?
Right.
If you're not an expert in that field...
Or 160 people off the street in the case of the textbook hearings.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not an expert in the field and you don't know what you're really talking about, then your say should be kind of minimal, in my opinion. Again, science should teach science. English, people who have actually studied English should be the ones to say, okay, here are the books that I would say should be read in English class, rather than just, asking somebody off the street saying, read any good books lately. There's a lot out there that, again, you really should be asking people who know what they're talking about what happens, rather than just kind of making stuff up on your own. And that's what a lot of creationists do, is just, they have their ideas, they don't challenge their ideas and their hypothesis. They just kind of throw them out there. They get a couple other creationists to back them up and say, yeah, that was pretty good work. And then they assume they've got this world-class idea.
You should read the list of recommendations in a creationist book at like Barnes & Noble sometime, because it's all like they all recommend each other's books.
Yeah, get 3 different creationist books, look up the references, they'll all be the same.
Yeah.
So... All right, I think we're going to wait. The names aren't matching up right now.
What,
I don't
Sally?
believe. Well, on line 1? On line 1. Okay. All right, we'll go with Sally. You there?
Okay. Hello.
Hi,
yes,
Sally.
You there?
Hi, yes I am. How are you guys?
Pretty well. What you got for us?
I'm just wondering, with the Michael Moore movie that just happened, this is a little bit off the subject, but not much.
Well, I just saw that last week, so...
Did you?
Yeah.
I just, everybody I've mentioned it to, and I'm talking about some people that can think for themselves but don't.
Yeah.
There seems to be so much fear. I mentioned it to a very religious relative of mine, and her take was, well, the Lord is bigger than that, and the Lord has a plan, and the rapture's coming in about, 2006.
Yeah.
We don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned it to a friend of mine who's an engineer in Alaska. I won't even go to say what he's doing, but I got this entire download on the Illuminati.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we've heard about them a few times.
I mean, lots of stuff.
Yeah.
And it just seems like fear is just running everything. It's, people are caught up in these little boxes where if they think outside the box, they're going to get zapped up, and they don't want to go there.
And that's also a lot of what religion does. Again, religion has this idea that here is the truth.
Yeah.
Don't question it.
Right.
Don't look elsewhere.
Exactly.
Most of all, don't look elsewhere.
Right.
Because essentially they know that if you do, you're not going to come back again.
Right. Like Douglas Adams says, they don't invite arguments against them because they don't stand up to them very well.
Exactly.
Well, that's absolutely true. But what's really scary is that I thought it took a lot of guts for Michael Moore to do what he did.
Oh, sure.
And
that doesn't mean I agree with every detail of the movie, but I think it's great that he's doing it.
Right, because he's thinking outside of the box at least, and I mean, maybe some of it might seem a little shocking and out of context, who knows, but unless we examine it, we aren't going to know. And furthermore, how you're not going to change the climate or the way things are by climbing in your little religious or whatever box, and under the sheets and pretending that it doesn't exist.
Right. Well, one of the things that worries me the most about the current political climate is that there's this trend for people to respond to arguments by saying, you shouldn't make those arguments.
Right. Exactly.
Not, that's a bad argument, not, I disagree with that argument, not, it's flawed, but, you are a bad person because you are saying that.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing with Michael Moore.
Right. Well, I think that's a lot of what you're seeing with anybody that you try to have an intelligent argument or just an intelligent debate, as you put it, because they're so afraid that you're going to step onto their beliefs or whatever, and they're going to have to admit that maybe they don't know,
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But anyway, I talk about it some more if you would, because, there's so many levels of people that are awake to what is really the truth. I mean, waking up to the fact that, hey, Santa Claus left a long time ago, kids, he ain't coming back. I mean, it's lonely when you can't discuss in an intelligent way, what we do know and what we don't know.
Yeah. I've always been the big proponent that any idea out there should have a voice. There shouldn't be too much overt censorship. The idea that the KKK, well, they shouldn't have a voice because hate-mongering people.
Well, they should be allowed to have a voice.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that we have to find... It doesn't mean that they're right. But it also doesn't mean that we have to hunt somebody down who's a KKK defender. I mean,
Of course.
I think people who believe that the Earth is flat still should be allowed to speak, but that doesn't mean I think they need to get published in newspapers as an alternative viewpoint.
Yeah.
So to speak.
And of course, but having those ideas out there is a good thing. I mean, people seeing ideas being challenged and cross-posted and just have a full and open discussion on things, I'm of the opinion is always a good thing.
Right.
Because, again, that kind of promotes the competition of ideas, and the better ones will win out over time.
Right. Well, I like you. I don't really have all the answers either. I don't know. I mean, the more I know, the less I know.
Yeah.
I'm very humble at this point. I'm willing to listen to anyone or anything, but I want it to make some sense. And a good deal of the time, it's limited because there's a real cutoff point when you get too close to people's belief systems.
Have you ever heard of the God of the Gaps argument?
What is that?
Well, it's basically when you're arguing with somebody who's religious, and they'll ask you a question, and you'll say, "Well, I don't know the answer to that," and they'll go, "Aha!
Yeah, oh yeah,
it's God."
Yeah. Oh, I know that one real well. I know that one real well.
And you're not valid in jumping to a conclusion just because you don't know something. I mean, sometimes not knowing something just means that you don't know something.
Yeah, that's the
not
honest
that
answer.
You can stick in whatever you want to in its place and say that's the right answer. There's no shame in just not knowing.
When I was a very little girl, I asked my father, if nothing is nothing, then what is nothing? And, before he died, which is, because we don't know that answer. I mean, ask a physicist.
Well, I'm not sure the question makes a lot of sense.
Actually, it really doesn't, because there's a lot we don't know. It's like the void, we don't know. And, I mean, I've asked a physicist this as I got older in college, who was a teacher, and he said, we don't know that. It's kind of a double negative, It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just think that there's so much stuff that we really don't know. That we think we know right away. Hey, that makes sense. But when you really look at it, it doesn't make sense. You have to keep digging.
Yeah.
It's like
it depends on what area you're looking at. Also, I mean, I think in terms of looking at the universe, there's certainly a lot that we don't know.
Right.
We have the idea of gravitation. We have the tiny little quarks and stuff like that. They don't mesh together.
Right.
We're not too sure exactly how that's working. We've got some ideas. We're working on it.
We're talking about the string theory.
Exactly.
There's another theory after that.
Exactly. But we've got a pretty good idea and a pretty good model of how the universe works.
Right.
In physical reality.
Right.
If you want to start talking about political ideas, that we don't know so much on.
Well, who does?
And everyone's
I
kind
know
of debating.
everything.
That's what everybody says.
Well, you guys are really thinkers, and I don't know.
Well,
Thank you.
it's
Keep
fun.
digging. Maybe we'll all figure it out at the same time.
As for the first point you were making about Michael Moore, though,
Yeah.
going back to that, I'm usually of the opinion, now I haven't seen the movie yet,
Yeah.
so I can't comment on it. I've read 1 or 2 articles out there, though.
Yeah.
I'm typically of the opinion that Michael Moore is very far left.
Yeah.
And he's selective in the truths that he portrays.
Right.
I think he does it much the same way that Rush Limbaugh does it.
Right. Exactly.
He's very selective in his truths. And so while both is technically correct, they're technically leaving a lot of important details out of the mixture there that are kind of relevant.
I don't think Rush Limbaugh is usually even technically correct.
He usually backs up a lot of what he says.
I don't know. I think
with
he just
direct
makes
quotes.
I heard this great thing. I listened to Air America Radio online, and I heard this great bit from Al Franken this week, in which he had a Rush Limbaugh clip of Rush Limbaugh saying, you liberals don't get it. You guys think that Christianity is all about just loving people and helping them, but Jesus said lots of other things like, if a man is hungry, then don't just give him a fish, teach him to fish. And Al Franken goes, okay, stop the tape. Jesus didn't say that. It's not in the Bible. Actually, it's an ancient Chinese proverb. But what Jesus did do was the miracle with the loaves and the fishes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I can imagine that one. I don't know. It depends on which version, I guess, too, that you're reading, right?
No, it's not in any
Not really,
version.
no.
Oh, is it not?
No, it's not a translation problem.
Listen, before I
No.
forget it, some guys were doing the Michael Moore show on Austin Cable Access yesterday, I think. And Michael Moore welcomes you to download his movie free.
Really?
And they gave a website. It's www.vcdquality.com.
Okay. That sounds big with me.
Just want to go to see what you want to see and not spend the money.
Okay.
Well,
Sounds kind of bootleg, but we'll see.
well, he says it's not bootleg. Michael Moore gave his permission.
Yeah.
As long as you don't sell it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, hey, if I can see it for free, I'm all for it.
Right. Well, anyway, thanks for your show. I always
right.
try to
Okay.
watch it and keep up the good work.
Okay, thanks a lot for calling.
Oh, one more thing.
Yeah.
If you care to, don't forget that we meet at Beignets every Sunday.
Exactly.
And lots of other things.
Where now?
Check out our website, atheist-community.org. Go look at regular events.
Okay, and where did you say the place was you meet?
The main that we have is Crescent City Beignets. It's on 6th Street, a couple blocks west of Lamar.
Okay.
That's just our normal meeting, open to any atheist-friendly people. That's every Sunday at 11:30.
Right, okay. Well, keep up the good work. I know you guys are smart. You're thinkers, and I don't see much of that on television, and I don't know too many people.
Especially not on the Access channel.
No
offense.
If I go back to New York or somewhere, there are more people to talk to. I don't know. There's just something that lingers here, You have to go around the university area to speak and be heard. So keep up the good work. At least you say you don't know, and I think that's where we basically are at this point. I don't have I thought I did it one time. I was pumped with all this stuff. But I realized that it's a very big egotistical kind of protective device, and the closest I can come to anything would be Gangaji, and she just says stop.
Okay.
Just stop, get out of your head and stop.
Okay.
Anyway, good luck, guys.
Okay, thanks a lot for calling. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of things in the world that we don't know, but there's a couple things that we're pretty sure on. And
that's the best we can ever say, really, is that we're pretty sure about things.
And being the host of the Atheist Experience, the idea that there is no God out there is pretty high on the list of we're pretty sure of that one. So if you think you've got a better idea, then challenge it, bring it on the air, and we'll see what we can do. And we will talk with Derek. How you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Yeah,
Hi,
pretty
Derek.
good.
Yes, one of the things that I wanted to bring to your attention, especially in the age that we live, is the preeminence of science. And you mentioned earlier that perhaps we should just confine to experts in order to have things done. But
Well, we ought to at least take into strong account what experts say about things.
Yeah.
yes, I understand that. But at times, it seems that experts cannot be left to their own devices. And I'll give you a simple thing. One of the things I'm in a scientific field, so I know.
Okay.
And you'd be very.
Which one?
I'm in engineering.
That's
Okay. And well, no. Let me tell you. One of the things that I have friends who are scientists, people that I grew up with who are practicing scientists. And one of the things that why they went into science was they felt that they would get into an area where things would be a lot more objective, that a lot of the humanity would be taken out of things. And what I mean by that is that you'd go into a field, you'd be able to present theories and hypotheses and have people objectively look at things and shoot you down. They're not...
It wouldn't be a political issue.
Yes, but it's very, very, very political. And it's always been political. I'll give you an example. Perhaps one of the greatest minds of the 20th century was Albert Einstein. And there was at the beginning of the century, when Einstein did most of his work, we don't know, people don't talk about it now. But at the time, one of the things that prevented Einstein from getting the recognition that he needed, and even the Nobel Prize, wasn't that people failed to comprehend his work because he was so way ahead of other people. One of the things that stopped Einstein was the fact that he was Jewish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and then especially in the 30s when the Nazis got into things, and there was a great German contingent. There was Planck, a lot of great people working at that time. That whole philosophy prevented Einstein from getting, in many respects, where he needed to be.
Yeah.
Okay, he could have done a great deal more work.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's
if he had the proper
certainly
support.
true.
Huh?
But that's certainly true. But,
Yeah.
luckily, in the long-term historical view, it turned out that he was right, and we found that out later.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that we can't discount the humanity and the political issues involved. Another thing too, where I believe that scientists have to be brought into check, and I'm saying this, clearly, is the fact that we have to divorce. And many times, scientific and intellectual acumen from morality. And what I mean from that is that I remember seeing a program the other day. Well, it's been a while back. On I don't know if you're familiar with the Tuskegee experiment.
Sounds vaguely familiar, but I'm not sure.
Where they did the study on syphilis.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Tuskegee study, rather.
I was like, World War II, I want to say?
Around that time.
Yeah.
Does the other gentleman understand what I'm talking about?
Maybe you could elaborate a little more.
They ran basically.
I'm guessing from the way you're bringing it up that maybe they experimented on people in an unethical way or something like that.
Yeah. But that isn't the point. The fact that they did it is of course it's morally reprehensible and whatnot.
Right.
But they came back and they spoke to the people, to many of the doctors and scientists involved. I believe it's in the early to mid 90s.
Yeah.
All right, these are old men.
Yeah.
These men had no qualms whatsoever as to what they did. There was no sense of perhaps regret, no sense of remorse.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I don't know how familiar you are with this.
Not very. I mean, I know of it, but that's about it.
Okay, well, what they did is that in the rural South, they ran some experiments on the effects of syphilis in the black population. All right? And what they did is allowed people to get infected, gave people the impression that they were going to get treatment, all right, and basically gave them placebos on purpose to see how, a running course of how the disease would follow the course and get information and data on that in a sizable population.
Yeah.
All right, not on like one or two people.
Yeah.
All right, this was government sanctioned.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that after all these years, after it came to light, the scientists involved saw nothing wrong with it. It was something that they wanted to study at the time. They felt that it was of some use because they did find out how to track the disease through the whole entire course, right?
Yeah.
Exactly how it goes through the different stages,
Yeah.
how it affects the different parts of the body. All of that is well documented now because of that. All right?
Yeah.
But, what I'm getting at is that...
Well, obviously, a lot of other people would disagree with them.
Yeah,
I
but-
mean,
but I-
you
what
know,
I'm-
of course there are going to be unpleasant individuals who make the wrong choices. We would. Part of what we hope through the general philosophy of science is that we would weed out inappropriate methods based on, based on the overall opinion of the community rather than what a few individuals do.
Well, not only that, but the thing is, though, a lot of things are done in secret. So, if people don't know,
Okay.
All right.
Well, they shouldn't be.
well,
That's
we're
what
talking
I
about-
was saying.
Yeah, we're talking about reality. Things are done in secret, and once you don't know, right? People didn't know this was being conducted. I mean,
Right.
in fact, the government denied it for years.
Yeah.
Right. The government also denied for years that they were running experiments on soldiers as far as exposure to blasts are concerned, and a whole host of other things. All right.
And this is something that should be open, and like you were saying, it should be open so that you can review it as it's happening and see what's going on, make sure that there's no misconduct or anything. But with every field and everything in human history, there's always going to be some people out there who've really messed it up.
Right, and
really
I hope you realize that when I say,
and that shouldn't be taken as a condemnation of the entire field.
right.
No, I'm
It's
not
all
thinking.
science.
When I say that I support scientific thinking in general, I don't. I may not refer to specific instances in which it was done badly. I'm talking about sort of an idealized concept of science in which the best way to think about things is to let ideas compete with each other.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that even though that's a thing, it has to be kept in check because people will, left to their own devices. I don't care how intelligent. I think what we do sometimes is we equate intellectual prowess with clear thinking in other areas. I mean,
I agree with you.
You know, we think, well, a person is the greatest math whiz. He's going to bring the greatest mathematical model to fore, but at the same time, he could be could be a pedophile or a rapist. It's a dichotomy, but it's what exists, and it's what's in the real world. That's why we have to at times the community at large has to keep track of what people are doing, and then just leave people to their own devices. He's the expert in the field, or she or that group of people know what they're doing. So there's no need for us to supervise them or let them be about their business.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
And hand in hand with that, I want to throw this out, but not tie it directly to what you've been talking about of, bad scientific experiments or bad experiments in general.
No, they're not bad experiments because they got the results they wanted, right?
Well, yeah, but obviously their methods left something to be desired.
Okay, well, that's what I'm saying.
But having constant public input on things can also be a scary factor because going back to the school board hearings and the textbooks, having the general public's input into what should be considered in health, well, a lot of the public is saying that you should have abstinence only. And you shouldn't teach about sex and stuff because sex is just icky. And kids shouldn't learn about that.
Well,
that's a scary concept. And to say that, people should be allowed to say what's being taught isn't going to lead to the best thing at all times.
Going back to something I said earlier, when you refer to somebody as an expert, a lot of people are experts only in one particular thing.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, you might have the world's greatest doctor, but you wouldn't bring him in to debug your computer when something's going wrong. Likewise, I think you're kind of saying that that effective science is sometimes separate from what we would consider good ethics.
Yes.
I agree with you there. I think that somebody could, in fact, be a brilliant scientist and have a very bad ethicist. And be a bad ethicist.
Well,
I certainly think that there is a place for legislation and regulation of the methods that people do by which people do things, regardless of whether it produces good science or not.
Yeah, yes, that's the point I wanted to make. Because,
okay, well, no argument there.
Yeah, and and as I said, you mentioned what was the point I wanted to make? That at times, as I said, we have to monitor what people are doing. It has to be Because another thing too is that a lot of people that are very brilliant don't want scrutiny.
Yeah.
They want to be about
Right.
you
Exactly.
put them in a lab, you
Yeah.
give them you give them the funding that they need, and they will produce the results that you need to find that you want, right? Whether the medicine or whatever it is, or the knowledge that you want out.
But that's kind of been my point all along. Is scrutiny is good in principle.
Yeah. It's definitely a difficult balancing act.
Yeah.
Because while you should have oversight and stuff like that, it can also lead to bad things, as in the oversight to the extent that we can't do stem cell research because that's killing, that's potentially killing people there. How do you decide where the oversight lies? If scientists are going to be the one to oversee other scientists, then that can lead to what you were saying and just have, bad ethics. If we have other people overseeing the scientist, well, then you've got people who don't necessarily know what they're talking about telling you how to do your job. And that obviously isn't the good thing to do there. So it's definitely a difficult balancing act that you've got to get right. And I think that's what we're still working out.
Yeah, but one of the things that I would, just like on the stem cell thing, one of the things that I would look at is all of the things that we do, as far as ethics are concerned, are based on current knowledge, which is subject to change day in and day out. And so I have a more conservative view on a lot of things, because I know that a lot of things are subject to change. And one of the things that I love about the scientific community is that at many times people publicize hypotheses and theories and market it in such a way like as though they're fact. All right, and it's broadly broadcast.
Love that.
Huh?
Are you sure love is the way you want to put that?
No. Well, no. The point I'm making is that it's in the scientific community, like in any other field in this society, it has to be marketed.
Right.
All right. You won't get this. You have to market your ideas in order to get the research dollars, in order to get the right people to come to work for you on the project or on your ideas or whatever. And what I'm saying is things are expounded, especially in the press, because the press are hungry for anything. I mean, look at the number of diets and causes for cancer.
No more.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is that as loudly as people expound these ideas, as publicly, as loudly as they expound them at times, when the theory or the hypothesis is proven false, you don't hear that.
You should. You should.
You should, but you don't.
Yeah.
Okay, at least in the public forum.
And typically what happens, though, is among the scientific community, though, that idea has been discredited and is no longer used. So while it may not be an immediate, let's go to the newspapers and say that this theory that we had last week is now trashed, it's not going to be used anymore, and so it will basically fall to the wayside.
Right. I think
typically that's how it's supposed to work.
That's why I think it's really valuable to have publications like the Skeptical Inquirer, for instance, produced by CFI,
exactly.
which makes it their business to go around and draw people's attention to experiments that failed and are still being promoted and hyped.
Yeah.
I think that is a very valuable service.
Well, yeah, but as I said, it's the politics of it all, because at the end of the day, unless you're independently wealthy, you've got to draw in the dollars to do research.
Yeah.
I have a friend that is a professor now, and he loves the science, but he's basically turned into an administrator just to get his work done, because he has to draw in the dollars and he has to do the necessary scheduling and budgeting. And do the dancing bear for the funders. In order for it to happen.
Unfortunately, that's a fact of life now.
I'm
not
discounting, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple friends in jobs completely unrelated to science, and they love their job, they love what they do, but man, if it wasn't for the paperwork that they have to do that, it sucks.
Yeah.
So.
Let me ask you this. I'll be quite upfront with you. I believe in God.
Okay.
And the reason I believe in, and the thing that reinforced my faith, and one of the things that reinforced my faith more than anything else, was my studies. And the reason for that is that, as difficult as it is, you may disagree, okay? You may, and I'm sure you're going to get calls on this.
Well,
as difficult as it is to be a scientist, in my mind, and from my point of view, it's 10 times, an order of magnitude more difficult being an engineer. And I'll tell you why. Because everything that we deal with here on this earth, we can what we're basically doing when we look at life, when we look at the planets, we're reverse engineering. Okay. It's here. It's present. You can analyze it. You can decompose it chemically. It's another thing to take sand off the beach and turn it into a microprocessor. And it's essentially, I'm sorry.
Well,
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm a computer programmer, so my point of view is my perspective is a little bit different from yours. In my line of work, what I see is that often things that look really, really complicated actually turn out to be governed by a very small set of simple rules.
That's true.
And that sometimes when you think something is so complicated that somebody intelligent must have been personally overseeing every detail of its creation, it turns out often that if you study it more, you may never find this out, but it may actually turn out that the principles behind how it works are actually so simple that you could write it in just a few lines of code.
True, but this is the beauty that where I see design, and I'll tell you where. Mm-hmm. The same intro differential equation that governs the oscillation in a resistor capacitor circuit are the same ones that in the mechanical world describe the oscillation of a pendulum, of a spring.
Okay.
Yeah.
You see, it's the same equation.
But I don't see that. I don't see that as evidence of some brilliant guy saying, "Oh, well, I'll make this equation over here match up with this equation over here, and that would be really neat." What I see it as is that when you come right down to it, the world can. The world can really boil down to a very small number of extremely simple principles, and those simple principles can go a very long way in explaining a whole lot of things that seem complicated to us.
Okay, but the point I'm making is, how do you connect an RC circuit with something totally in the electrical world with something in the mechanical?
Well, the equation you're describing is simply a generalized description of things that go back and forth.
Yeah, it's physics.
Yeah, it's physics.
They both
that's
do
the point I'm making.
Well, they both do the same thing. That's why they're described as the same equation.
No, that's true. But what I'm getting at is the general principle. It comes down to a fundamental principle. Okay.
So you're saying, where did it come from in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, how does it? It comes out to be very simple equations. Okay. That's the point. Because as you mentioned, that many things that are very, very complex get distilled into a couple of simple equations.
Right.
They're just merely derivatives or expansions of those equations. Yeah. Very simple principles.
So you would agree that in your experience, a lot of times complicated things boil down to simpler ones.
Yeah, but I'll give you a simple example.
Well, no, I've got a question though. Would you consider God to be a simple thing or a complicated thing?
I would I would think him to be a very complex mind, very complex entity.
Okay, so what you're saying is that complex things tend to turn into simple things, but then they turn back into complicated things once you get beyond a certain point.
What I'm saying is...
I mean, if complicated things have to be explained in terms of simpler principles, then what explains God?
Well, I'll give you a simple example. You're a computer programmer.
Yes.
Right? One of the things that makes a very, very good computer programmer better than others is a person who is able to, at times, break things down, be able to see a problem in a very simple form.
Divide and conquer.
Well, no, I'm not talking about divide and conquer.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about actually I'm not talking about decomposing something. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about something, you give two people the same problem, okay? One person will take 20 lines of code, and another person, this could be there are various things, experience or just raw intelligence. What one person will take in 25 lines of code can be distilled by another person, done in another person, with a fifth as many codes, maybe 4 lines.
Yep.
You see?
You want to know something really cool, though? Have you ever heard of evolutionary algorithms?
Yes.
Well, basically an evolutionary algorithm is where the computer basically, you give it some instructions and the computer goes out and tries some random things on its own and then picks the ones that work the best. And it turns out that it has often happened that when you take a complicated problem and you feed that to the computer and just let the computer figure it out, the computer often does it a whole lot better than the human does.
Oh, yeah.
Based on extremely simple principles.
Yeah. But the point is, what I'm saying is that, for me, intelligence, in many respects, to be truly intelligent at times means being able to start from the very basics and build a complex upon it. It's just like, for me, all your microchips are basically built, at least I'm talking about digital microchips. I don't want anybody calling me an idiot, okay? I'm talking about digital.
Well, yeah,
are based on very simple structures.
Yeah,
okay?
and
you go from,
or not, stuff like that. You have those
well, no.
Right.
7, I think it is.
No, you start from
Electrical components.
Yeah.
Like
no. I'm
resistors.
talking about you start from transistors.
Yeah.
Okay, and you go from transistors to gates.
Yep.
Okay, and from gates you go to larger structures and to arithmetic logical units. It progresses. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's all based on the gates and
Right. Well, that sounds an awful lot like how evolution works, doesn't it?
yeah. But the thing is, with evolution, how much time would it take? We have people are talking about billions of years, but we do know, and I don't know if you disagree with this, that the universe has some age, or you don't subscribe to that at all.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
I think
No,
that's
the
pretty
universe
well.
as we know it, the cosmos.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think
That
that's
we're
pretty
familiar
well
with.
accepted.
Yeah.
You don't believe that,
This
or what?
present universe, I think,
Yeah.
it's pretty well established that it does.
Okay, but if you start looking at just the number of permutations, the combinatorial, the combinatorial mathematics that has to go through.
Yeah, but there's also a problem with that, as in that's the big numbers that often get thrown out there.
Yeah.
That the chance of producing a reproducing strand of DNA is 1 in 526 zillion.
Okay.
And it would take the age of the universe to come with it if by random chance.
Yes. But
There are a lot of problems with that idea. One is that you assume that you have to go through all 26 zillion of them, when
One at a time.
one at a time for one thing, and two, you don't need to go through them all because it could be on the 5th one that you get it.
Yeah.
Unlikely,
Yeah.
but possible.
Well,
Okay.
and some combinations may build on other combinations.
Which
so
Exactly.
that,
I totally understand. Okay. But I'm not even getting to talking about DNA. That's just a one strand of the DNA.
Yeah.
We don't we have not even begun to understand the cell. Okay, because the cell is a universe of itself.
Well, again, there's things that we don't know, but we've got a fairly good idea of how it works.
We have a fairly good idea, but what you're suggesting is we start with the very basics, which is DNA. Okay?
yeah, but what you're suggesting is we don't know, so let's plug in some almighty, powerful intelligence,
No, that's
extremely
not what I'm
complicated
saying.
thing that explains everything.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this. We get the possibility, because we start calculating the probability of that one strand. Okay? Fine. That's just a basic structure.
Okay.
Okay? Within the cell, you have to start building other structures based on that.
Right,
Okay.
after the first structure already exists. then
Okay,
you move
but
on to
no,
the
just
next
we're
phase.
just on the first structure. So we have to
Well,
then take
no,
the
you
possibility.
can't multiply probabilities like that if they're
Yeah.
dependent on each other. I mean, if you roll 2 dice, you ask, what is the probability that I got a 12? It's 36, right?
Uh-huh.
But if you roll a 6, and then you say, what is the probability that I got a 12? Then the probability that you got a 12 goes down to 6. It goes way down because some probabilities are dependent on other things that already happened.
Okay, that's not the point I'm making.
And with that, unfortunately, we don't have time for it right
I'm
now.
sorry.
We have got 40 seconds left on
Oh,
the
I'm
show.
sorry.
So we're going to let you go.
Okay.
But thanks a lot for calling in.
Okay.
For that caller and anyone else who is waiting on the line or has any comments for us, tv@atheist-community.org. Go ahead and write us, and we will reply to you via email. And if it's something good, we'll bring it on the air. Anyway, it's been another good show. Thank you very much, Russell, for coming on and helping out.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to all the viewers out there. Again, we have we have Crescent City Beignet every Sunday at 11:30, near 6 in Lamar. Have a good 4th of July, everybody.